You think you know where life can exist. You've learned the rules. Life needs sunlight. It needs oxygen. It needs temperatures that don't boil or freeze. These are the boundaries, the non-negotiables written into every biology textbook, carved into our understanding of what it means to be alive. But what if everything you know about the requirements for life is wrong? The ocean's surface glitters under the sun. Here, in these upper layers, life unfolds exactly as you'd expect. Phytoplankton drift in vast invisible clouds, photosynthesizing, converting light into energy. Fish schools move in synchronized waves. The food chain begins here, with the sun, just as it does on land. This is the world we understand. But we're not staying here. We're descending. 200 meters down. The light begins to fade. The blues deepen to indigo, then to something darker, a twilight zone where shadows don't quite disappear but never fully form. At 300 meters, most of the red wavelengths have been absorbed. At 600 meters, there's barely enough light for a human eye to detect. And yet, you keep going deeper. At 1,000 meters, you pass through an invisible threshold. True darkness begins. Not the darkness of a moonless night, where your eyes might adjust, where stars might guide you. This is absolute darkness, a darkness that has existed here for billions of years, unchanged, indifferent. The pressure around you is now 100 times what you experience at sea level. Every square inch of your body, if you were somehow here without protection, would be crushed by 1,500 pounds of force. The temperature hovers just above freezing. 3 degrees Celsius. Cold enough to slow every chemical reaction, to make movement itself an act of defiance. You are now deeper than sunlight has ever reached. Deeper than most of human history has explored. And still, you keep descending. 2,000 meters. 3,000. The water here is not just dark, it is a kind of darkness that erases the concept of space. There is no up or down that you can see. No reference points. Just the subtle currents, and the occasional bioluminescent flash from creatures you'll never fully see. This is the Abyssal Zone. Scientists once called it the lifeless zone. They assumed that without sunlight, without warmth, without the very foundation of the food chains we knew, nothing substantial could survive here. They were wrong. At 2,500 meters, you begin to notice something. Flecks in the darkness. Marine snow, they call it. A constant shower of organic debris, dead plankton, fecal matter, mucus, the remains of creatures from the sunlit world above. It drifts down like ash from a distant fire, taking weeks or months to reach these depths. And even here, in this frozen darkness, life clings to these falling remnants. Deep-sea amphipods, translucent crustaceans no larger than your thumb, swarm over each particle, extracting whatever nutrition remains. Tripod fish stand motionless on the seafloor on elongated fin rays, facing into the current, waiting for marine snow to drift into their mouths. They may wait for hours. Days. In the deep ocean, patience is not a virtue. It is the only strategy. But these creatures are still following the old rules. They're still dependent, however indirectly, on the sun. On photosynthesis happening kilometers above their heads. On energy that originates in that bright, warm, distant world. The deeper you go, the more tenuous that connection becomes. 3,000 meters. You're now 2 miles beneath the ocean's surface. The pressure is nearly 300 atmospheres, enough to compress a foam cup to the size of a thimble. The temperature has dropped to 2 degrees Celsius. You're moving along the ocean floor now, across vast plains of sediment that stretch for hundreds of kilometers, interrupted only by the occasional rise of an undersea mountain range. And then, impossibly, you notice something. Heat. Not just warmth, intense, concentrated heat, radiating from a crack in the seafloor. The water around you shimmers, distorted by thermal currents. As you approach, the temperature soars from 2 degrees to 20. Then 50. Then over 300 degrees Celsius. You found a hydrothermal vent. These are the places where Earth's molten interior breaks through the ocean floor. Where superheated water, laden with minerals from deep within the planet's crust, erupts into the freezing ocean. The water is black, or sometimes white, clouded with dissolved metals, iron, manganese, copper, zinc, sulfur. When it meets the cold ocean water, these minerals precipitate out instantly, forming towering chimneys that can grow several meters in a single year. These chimneys belch dark plumes that look like smoke. Black smokers, scientists call them. Some rise 20 meters high. Others form entire fields of jagged spires, like a sunken Gothic cathedral built from minerals instead of stone. This is a place that should be sterile. The water emerging from these vents is not just hot, it's acidic, toxic, saturated with chemicals that would kill most surface life within seconds. Hydrogen sulfide, hydrogen cyanide, heavy metals. No sunlight. No oxygen, at least not in the vent water itself. Every rule you know about habitable environments is violated here. And yet, surrounding the black smokers, clustered around the base, clinging to the sides, spreading across the seafloor in dense mats, is life. Abundant, thriving, concentrated life. Giant tube worms rise from the rock like blood-red flowers. Riftia pachyptila, scientists call them. They can grow 3 meters long, as tall as a human. They have no mouth. No digestive system. No anus. Their blood-colored plumes wave gently in the currents, filtering the vent water. But they're not filtering food. They're filtering chemicals. Inside each tube worm, packed into a specialized organ called a trophosome, are billions of bacteria. Not parasites, partners. These bacteria perform a kind of alchemy that, until 1977, scientists didn't believe was possible. They take hydrogen sulfide, the same chemical that gives rotten eggs their smell, the same compound that's toxic to most life, and they oxidize it. They strip electrons from it. And they use that energy to convert carbon dioxide into organic compounds. Chemosynthesis. Life powered not by the sun, but by Earth's volcanic heat. By chemistry. By reactions that have been happening in the planet's crust since long before photosynthesis evolved. The tube worms and the bacteria exist in perfect symbiosis. The worms provide shelter, access to both vent water and oxygenated seawater. The bacteria provide all the nutrition the worms need. An entire metabolism outsourced to microscopic partners. The tube worms grow faster than almost any other invertebrate on Earth, adding 80 centimeters per year in some cases. But the tube worms are just the beginning. White crabs scramble across the rocks. Bythagria thermidron, vent crabs, with pale, eyeless bodies adapted to darkness. They cluster so densely around some vents that the seafloor appears to move. They graze on bacterial mats, scavenge dead organisms, and sometimes prey on each other when competition for resources becomes too intense. Nearby, clusters of mussels, Bathymodialis, anchor themselves to any hard surface. They can grow larger than your fist. Their shells are dark, nearly black. And inside, like the tube worms, they house chemosynthetic bacteria in their gills. The mussels farm these bacteria, providing them with sulfide and methane from the vents, and in return receiving a steady supply of organic compounds. There are clams here too. Giant clams, some 30 centimeters across. Calyptogena magnifica. They burrow into the sediment at the edge of vent fields, where warm water percolates up through the seafloor. They extend their siphons into sediment pockets rich with sulfide, feeding the bacteria they carry inside specialized organs. And then there are the Pompeii worms. Alvinella pompigena. Perhaps the most extreme organisms here. They build tubes on the sides of black smoker chimneys, where the water can reach 80 degrees Celsius, far hotter than any other known animal can tolerate. Their tails rest in water that would instantly scald human skin. Their heads extend into cooler water, maybe 20 degrees. This should kill them. Proteins denature at such temperatures. DNA unravels. Cell membranes break down. And yet, the Pompeii worms persist. Scientists discovered that these worms are covered in a fleece-like coating of bacteria. Millions of bacteria, forming a living blanket several millimeters thick. The bacteria may act as insulation, protecting the worm from heat. They may detoxify the surrounding water, breaking down harmful chemicals before they reach the worm's body. Or they may provide nutrition. Or perhaps all three. No one is certain yet. The worm's internal biology is equally mysterious. Their tissues contain heat shock proteins at concentrations far higher than any other animal. These proteins act like molecular chaperones, constantly refolding other proteins that begin to break down in the heat, maintaining function despite conditions that should make life impossible. But even this explanation is incomplete. How the Pompeii worm's DNA remains stable, how its cell membranes stay intact, how its metabolism functions at the upper limits of what biochemistry should allow, these questions remain partially unanswered. At the edges of the vent field, you notice something stranger still. Colonies of organisms that look like miniature gardens. Alvinochorididae shrimp, vent shrimp, gather by the thousands. They have no functional eyes. Instead, on their backs, where their eyes should be, they have light-sensing organs. These organs can't form images, can't see shapes or movement. They can only detect one thing, the faint infrared glow from the superheated vent water. The shrimp position themselves in the narrow zone between scalding heat and frigid cold, farming bacteria on their mouthparts. They wave these specialized appendages through the water, filtering out the bacteria they cultivate, consuming them in a continuous cycle. But there are stranger architects here. Scaly-foot snails, Chrysomalon squamiferum, found at vents in the Indian Ocean. They're the only known animals to incorporate iron sulfide into their shells and the only known mollusks with scales. Their shells are triple-layered. The outer layer is made of iron sulfide. Essentially, the snail grows armor plating from the minerals dissolved in vent water. This armor may protect them from predators, or from the toxic vent environment itself. And inside their bodies, in their enlarged esophageal glands, they host yet another species of chemosynthetic bacteria. Every organism here is a collaboration. A partnership between visible life and invisible bacteria, between animals and chemistry, between the living and the volcanic. Scientists estimate that more than 500 unique species have been discovered at hydrothermal vents. New species are identified every time researchers explore a new vent field. Some vents in the Atlantic host different communities than vents in the Pacific. Vents near each other can have entirely different dominant species. Why this diversity? Why this specificity? We don't fully know. You might assume these vent ecosystems are fragile. That they exist on the edge of survival, clinging to a narrow set of conditions that could collapse at any moment. But the opposite appears to be true. Individual hydrothermal vents are ephemeral. The seafloor is constantly shifting, tectonic plates spreading, magma chambers cooling, new cracks forming while old ones seal. A vent field might last decades or centuries before the volcanic activity that sustains it moves elsewhere or ceases entirely. When a vent dies, the ecosystem dies with it. The tube worms suffocate as their bacterial symbionts starve. The crabs and snails disperse or perish. Within months, a thriving oasis becomes barren rock. And yet, the organisms persist. Somehow, larvae from distant vent fields that might be hundreds of kilometers away, find these new vents. They drift in the deep ocean currents, traveling for months or years, through kilometers of pitch-black ocean, until they detect the chemical signature of a new vent and settle. How they navigate is largely unknown. How they time their dispersal, how they survive the journey, how they locate vents across such vast distances, these mechanisms remain subjects of active research. What we do know is that hydrothermal vent ecosystems have existed for a very, very long time. Fossilized vent organisms have been found in rocks over 100 million years old. The basic structure of these ancient communities, tube worms, mussels, crabs, was already in place. The chemistry was the same. The partnerships between animals and bacteria were already established. This means that while individual vents are temporary, the strategy of chemosynthetic life has endured longer than most species on Earth's surface. Longer than many of the lineages we consider ancient. But here's what's more profound, chemosynthesis itself may be even older than photosynthesis. The earliest photosynthetic organisms appeared around 3 billion years ago. They transformed the planet, filling the atmosphere with oxygen, enabling complex life, creating the world we recognize today. But before that, Earth was a very different place. The atmosphere was mostly nitrogen and carbon dioxide. There was little free oxygen. The sun was fainter. The surface was bombarded by radiation. And yet, life emerged. Where? Increasingly, scientists suspect the answer might be, at hydrothermal vents. Not the deep-sea vents we've been exploring, those require liquid oceans, tectonic activity, conditions that took hundreds of millions of years to establish. But similar systems. Alkaline hydrothermal vents in shallow seas, or even in ponds and lakes on early Earth. Places where heated, mineral-rich water met cooler water, creating chemical gradients. These gradients, differences in temperature, in acidity, in chemical composition, can drive chemical reactions spontaneously. The conditions at vents create natural proton gradients across mineral membranes, the same kind of gradients that all life uses today to store and transfer energy. It's possible that the first self-replicating molecules didn't need sunlight at all. They needed heat. Chemistry. The constant flow of energy from Earth's interior. If this hypothesis is correct, then the tube worms and the vent bacteria aren't outliers. They're not extremophiles clinging to the margins of habitability. They're descendants of Earth's first ecosystems. They're using the same metabolic pathways, the same fundamental chemistry, that made all other life possible. We are the descendants of photosynthesis. But photosynthesis may be the descendant of chemosynthesis. The sunlit world we inhabit, the forests, the grasslands, the surface ecosystems we consider normal, might be the adaptation. The exception. The later innovation. The deep-sea vents might be closer to the original. When scientists imagine life on other worlds, they often start with the same assumptions we started with: liquid water, moderate temperatures, sunlight or some other stable energy source. But the discovery of hydrothermal vent ecosystems changed that calculus. Jupiter's moon Europa is covered in ice. Beneath that ice, kilometers thick, is an ocean, a global ocean larger than all of Earth's oceans combined. There's no sunlight. The surface is bathed in lethal radiation. Temperatures hover around -160 degrees Celsius. But at the bottom of Europa's ocean, tidal forces from Jupiter's gravity heat the moon's core. Tidal flexing, constant and powerful, generating heat through friction. And if there's heat, and liquid water, there could be hydrothermal vents. The same applies to Saturn's moon Enceladus. Scientists have detected plumes of water vapor erupting from its south pole, ejected from an underground ocean. Analysis of those plumes shows not just water, but organic compounds. Hydrogen. Silica particles that could only form at temperatures above 90 degrees Celsius. Enceladus has hydrothermal vents. And if vents can host life here on Earth, in the absence of sunlight, in toxic water, under crushing pressure, why not there? Suddenly, the number of potentially habitable worlds in our solar system expands dramatically. Not just the planets in the so-called habitable zone, where liquid water might exist on the surface, but any world with liquid water and geological activity. Any world with chemistry. The organisms at Earth's hydrothermal vents aren't just teaching us about life in extreme environments. They're teaching us what life itself might require. And it might require far less than we thought. But there's something scientists still cannot explain. For all we've learned, there are fundamental questions that remain unanswered. Why do vent ecosystems vary so dramatically from location to location? Vents in the Atlantic are dominated by shrimp. Vents in the Pacific by tube worms. Vents in the Indian Ocean by the scaly-foot snail. The chemistry is similar. The temperatures are similar. The depth is similar. So why the difference? We don't know. How did the symbiosis between animals and bacteria first evolve? Tube worms have no digestive system. They're entirely dependent on their bacteria. This means the relationship couldn't have evolved gradually. A tube worm without bacteria would starve immediately. So how did these organisms transition from free-living to symbiotic? We don't know. How do larvae navigate hundreds of kilometers of open ocean to find new vent fields? They have no eyes. They're microscopic. They drift in currents for months or years. What sensory mechanisms guide them? What chemical signals do they follow? We don't know. And perhaps most fundamentally, how did life itself begin? Was it at vents, as some scientists suspect? Or somewhere else? Were the first organisms similar to modern bacteria? Or something stranger, something we haven't imagined yet? We don't know. Every answer at hydrothermal vents reveals 3 new questions. Every discovery suggests entire fields of biology and chemistry we haven't even mapped yet. The deeper we look, the more we realize how much remains hidden. Not hidden in the darkness of the deep ocean. Hidden in the limitations of our understanding. You begin the long ascent. 2 miles up, through the crushing darkness, through the zones of twilight and transition, back toward the sun. The pressure eases. The temperature rises. Light begins to filter through the water, first as a faint glow, then as distinct rays, then as the familiar bright blue of the shallow ocean. You break the surface. The sun is warm on your face. The air is breathable. This is the world you know. The world that feels normal, comfortable, designed for life like yours. But something has changed. You look out at the horizon and you realize, this bright, warm, oxygen-rich world is just one possibility. One set of conditions where life took hold. One experiment in a planet full of experiments. Beneath your feet, kilometers below, in the cold and the darkness and the crushing pressure, life is thriving. Not in spite of the conditions there, but because of them. Not clinging to the margins of habitability, but occupying a niche as valid, as ancient, and perhaps as fundamental as any ecosystem under the sun. Life doesn't need our world. Our world is just one variation on a theme that's far broader, far stranger, and far more resilient than we imagined. And if life can exist in superheated, toxic water, 2 miles beneath the ocean, in complete darkness, under pressures that would obliterate most organisms, where else might it exist that we haven't thought to look? There are estimated to be millions of hydrothermal vents scattered across Earth's ocean floor. We've explored perhaps 200 of them. We've mapped less than 20% of the seafloor in any detail. There are entire mountain ranges, vast abyssal plains, deep trenches, and geological formations beneath the ocean that no human has ever seen. And we've only just begun to understand the ecosystems at the vents we have visited. Somewhere in the deep Pacific, right now, there's a vent field no one has discovered. It's been there for decades, maybe centuries. Communities of organisms are living their entire lives, generation after generation, in a place humans will never visit. Does that make them any less real? Any less important? Any less worthy of wonder? You are standing on the surface of a planet where most of the biosphere is invisible to you. Where most of the living world exists in places you can't go, under conditions you couldn't survive, following rules you're only beginning to understand. And that's just this planet. We've sent probes to other worlds. We've analyzed their atmospheres, mapped their surfaces, measured their compositions. We've looked for signs of life using the definitions we know, the markers we recognize. But what if life elsewhere doesn't follow our rules? What if it's weirder than tube worms, stranger than bacteria that eat rock, more alien than anything we've found at Vents? What if we're looking for the wrong things, in the wrong places, asking the wrong questions? The organisms at hydrothermal vents are not a curiosity. They're not an exception to the rules of biology. They're a reminder that the rules themselves might be far broader than we thought. That life is not fragile, but astonishingly adaptable. That the universe might be far more alive than we've dared to imagine. But the only way to find out is to keep looking. To keep descending into the unknown. To keep asking questions, even when we know we might not find answers. Because the deepest truth the vents have taught us is this. We don't know what we don't know. And that, perhaps, is the most profound discovery of all.